she saw what was inside, she began screaming too. Then eventually she turned around and ran back to the house and dialed 911. Couple hours later, at almost 4 a.m., Detective Joe, crime squad of the Eugene Department of Public Safety, drove his 1993 Ford Taurus at 3 Line Street towards Aaron's house. Detective Michaud pulled up a modest 2-story split level house with a 2-car garage in front. He saw red and blue flashing lights from the police cruisers parked outside and yellow crime scene tape strung across the front of the house. Michaud thought a scene like this seemed so out of place in such a quiet and safe neighborhood. Parking, Michaud stepped out of his car and breathed in the crisp morning fall air. He was a veteran in law enforcement and an experienced lead detective, but there was something about receiving calls in the dead of night that still put him on edge. At least he knew what he was about to walk into. He'd been informed that an 18-year-old male named Aaron Itora had been found shot in his bedroom and that he had been rushed to the hospital. Michaud had also been told that there was no sign of forced entry and that the victim's girlfriend had been found in bed with him, but completely unharmed. And Michaud knew that in a situation like this, the girlfriend was usually the most obvious suspect. So Michaud walked up to the house where he was greeted by the officers who were already on the scene. Those officers led him inside the house where he saw Carrie sitting on the living room couch with Aaron's mother and his oldest sister. All 3 women were still in the clothes they'd been sleeping in, and they were crying and holding each other. But before Michaud could talk to them, he needed to see the crime scene. So he walked past the women and followed the officers out to the garage and into Aaron's makeshift bedroom. The evening of December 8th, 2001, old Dr. Robert Schwartz stood in the kitchen of his farmhouse outside of Leesburg, Virginia, stirring strips of pork and vegetables in a frying pan. Robert could hear the rain beating against the windows, and the sound made him feel at peace. He had the heat cranked up, and he was wearing his most comfortable sweatpants. There was nowhere he would rather be on a rainy winter night than inside this home, which had been in his wife's family for generations. He checked the pork, which was almost done, for a single plate out of the cabinet. He used to love cooking, and until just a few years ago, he always made big portions to feed his family of 5. But his wife had died 3 years earlier from cancer, and her death had sent all 3 of their kids spiraling, especially their youngest, Clara, who was only 15 at the time. Clara was the one who actually found her mom on the morning she died. She had fallen into a deep depression afterwards. Robert had been worried he might never pull her out. But recently, Clara seemed to have gotten into a really good group. She was 19 now, and she'd found a tight-knit group of friends who all loved Renaissance fairs, where people dress up like they're from medieval times. But had created a fantasy game called Underworld, and the kids all spent a lot of time playing it. Robert didn't really understand the game. He was thrilled that Clara had finally discovered something to be passionate about. Days, Clara was away at college, along with her older sister, Michelle, and her older brother, Jesse. And Robert was proud of how he had pulled the kids through their mother's death. He felt like he had sent them out into the world as basically happy and capable people, which was a goal that seemed very far away in the early period of their grief. He did miss them, though. Most nights now, he ate alone, drinking at the old house to keep him company. Peter was complaining about all the noise that the house made, but Robert liked it. He spent his days working long hours as a biophysicist studying DNA at a science and technology firm called the Center for Innovative Technology, where the offices and laboratories were white and brightly lit and pretty quiet. Loved his work, but the environment was a little sterile for his taste. So, coming home to an overgrown farmhouse way out in the woods, where vines grew up the stone walls, the floorboards squeaked, and the nearest neighbors were more than a quarter mile away, was a nice contrast. Now, he set his plate down, and reached into a bag of tortillas on the counter. He put 2 in the middle of the plate, and he started to tip the frying pan to scoop out the meat and vegetables on top. But before he could turn off the burner and head to the table, he heard a knock coming from the front door. Bert frowned and craned his neck to look at the door. The little window. Rain made it impossible to see out. He did not get a lot of unexpected visitors, especially not on a stormy night like this. We figured maybe it was just a delivery driver trying to keep a package from getting soaked. But whoever it was, knocked again. So Robert turned and walked out of the kitchen and through the front room toward the entryway. Knocking had gotten fast and loud. By the time Robert made it to the front door, hooked the lock, and swung the door open. Days later, on December 10th, 2001, at around 1:15 on Monday afternoon, a man named Sam Welsh lived down the street from Robert Schwartz, was loading laundry into his washing machine when his phone rang. Sam abandoned the laundry, walked into the kitchen to pick it up. Said hello, the voice of a friend. His friend sounded pretty anxious. His friend worked at the Center for Innovative Technology, which is where Robert said that Robert had come to work today. He'd missed an important meeting, was answering his phone. This was about as out of character as it was possible to get for Robert, who was famous in the field of DNA research and had actually worked on the first online database of DNA sequence information. Robert was organized, reliable, and extremely communicative. He never just went silent. So this friend asked Sam, "Can you please go to Robert's house to check to see if he's okay?" Sam didn't hesitate. He said, of course he would. Then he hung up the phone, went out to his truck, and drove to Robert's farmhouse, which was about a mile away at the end of the dead end road. As Sam pulled up, he saw Robert's car parked on the street, and a construction crew digging up Robert's driveway in front of the house. Everything looked calm and normal, which Sam found encouraging. He recognized one of the workers as another neighbor of his, so he parked his truck, hopped out, and went over to ask if the worker had seen Robert. The worker said no. The construction crew had arrived almost 6 hours earlier, at 7:30 that morning. Not only had Robert not come out to greet them all like he usually did, he hadn't actually seen any movement at all inside his house. No, the brief sense of relief Sam had felt when he arrived evaporated. He explained to the construction worker about the concerning call he just got, so he asked the worker to come with him to go check on Robert. The two men walked down the driveway toward the farmhouse, knocked on the front door, but nobody answered. So they went around the side door, which Sam knew Robert usually left unlocked. Sam didn't want to just barge in, so when they got to the side door, he first knocked loudly. Again, nobody answered. Sam shot a worried look at the construction worker, then he tried the knob. And just like he'd expected, the door was unlocked. Sam stepped inside and called out Robert's name, but the house was completely silent. So he took a few halting steps. Ahead of him, he could see the kitchen. Sam called out Robert's name again and took one more step forward, right up to the threshold of the kitchen, and then he froze. For a long second, Sam stood there completely still, not even breathing, with the construction worker a few paces behind him. Then Sam rolled around and gave the worker a shove back towards the door. Sam was so afraid he could barely think, but he managed to shout one single sentence: "Call the police." Loudoun County investigator Greg Locke was sitting in a classroom at a local school near Leesburg, Virginia, halfway through the first day of a week-long police training course when his page vibrated. And when Locke looked down at the short message blinking on his little screen, he felt his heart start to race. He stood up and gathered his things, told the instructor he was sorry, but he had to go, and speed walked out of the classroom. Locke had only been with the Loudoun County Sheriff's Department for a couple of months. He had originally planned on becoming a firefighter, but training for that position had required him to go to the local police academy. And in the police academy, Locke had realized that he actually preferred the slow, puzzle-solving nature of detective work over the fast-paced intensity of firefighting. So he had switched careers entirely and joined the sheriff's department. He started off in the crime lab, but he just transferred to the homicide unit, exactly why he was taking this class. Investigator Locke pushed open the front door of the school building where his class was happening, jogged the rest of the distance to his cruiser, got in from the ignition, peeled out of the parking lot, west toward the big old farmhouse and woods. When Locke pulled up on the dead-end street, he saw the flashing blue and white lights of a sea of police cruisers. It looked like the entire sheriff's department was there. Locke got out of his cruiser and walked down the long driveway and up the front steps of the farmhouse. The front door was open, and as Locke stepped through the entryway, he could tell that the scene was pretty well covered by police and crime scene techs. So he looked for its supervisor to get a rundown of exactly what they were dealing with. Locke found his supervisor standing just outside the kitchen, staring grimly at a man's bloody body. At first glance, it was immediately clear to Locke that whatever had happened here to this man, it had been a frenzy of violence. The man's body lay face down on the floor. His clothing had been shredded in the attack, and there was so much blood that it dried in sticky, thick pools that spread out all over the hardwood. Even the bottom of the man's white socks were bloody, which Locke knew meant there must have been a struggle, because the only way for the bottom of his socks to get that soaked was if he had been bleeding heavily and then stepped in it. Locke's supervisor turned away from the body and brought Locke quickly up to speed. Their victim was Dr. Robert Schwartz, who was a well known biophysicist, and he had been stabbed to death. It didn't appear to be a robbery because nothing had been stolen or rifled through, and there was no sign of forced entry, which meant that very likely Robert had opened the door to his attacker willingly. Locke knew that a set of facts like this often meant that a murder victim had been targeted by a person they knew, rather than attacked by a random stranger. And the savagery of the stabbing itself supported that theory, because it suggested a highly emotional killer who felt true rage towards the victim. But Locke's supervisor told him there was one more thing, something incredibly bizarre. Whoever had stabbed Dr. Schwartz to death had also carved an X into the back of his neck. Locke told his supervisor that he was going to start canvassing the neighborhood, and his supervisor nodded in agreement. As Locke walked back out the front door of the farmhouse, he looked around and shook his head incredulously. This was a beautiful area. It was up in the mountains, and it was sitting right above a historic little downtown district with nice restaurants and breweries and coffee shops and a vibrant art scene. It was very hard to imagine any murder taking place here, let alone some kind of ritual killing that involved a vicious knife attack and a symbol carved into the victim's skin. The nearest house was way down the road, and as Locke reached it and climbed the front steps, he realized he couldn't even see Robert's home from here. This gave him a sinking feeling. He was afraid that the people inside of this house could not have possibly heard anything going on inside of Robert's house a quarter mile away. None of the neighbors could have. But Locke knocked anyway, and soon a middle aged married couple answered, looking concerned. They said they had seen all the commotion, and they asked if everything was okay. Inspector Locke just shook his head and said no. There had been an incident, but he couldn't say anything about it right now. Locke told the couple that what he had come for was to ask if they had seen or heard anything suspicious over the weekend. He watched as the couple exchanged a look. Yes, the husband said. As a matter of fact, they did. On Saturday night, during the rainstorm, a soaking wet teenage boy had come to their house asking to use the phone because his car got stuck in the mud a little ways down the road. The husband said he had looked outside and seen the car, which had a young woman and man inside, and then he said he called a towing company that he knew, and the teenager had thanked him and gone back to the car to wait. And the tow truck driver had arrived not long after. car, telling Clara when she last talked to her father. Clara looked down at the floor and shook her head sadly. Friday, she said. They had talked about her coming home for the holidays in a few weeks. Then she paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was almost a whisper. She said that during that last conversation, she and her father had fought. She had a car, but it was back at the farmhouse, and she wanted to bring it to school, but her dad wouldn't let her. She looked up at Locke and told him that she didn't know why she had gotten so upset at him. Her dad had promised to consider it over the holidays, so she didn't even know why she blew up at him. Now, her final conversation with her father would always be this stupid argument. Locke watched as Clara dropped her head again. He felt sorry for the stunned and awkward teenager. He told Clara he hated to keep pressing, but he needed to know about her father's friends and relationships, and about the people that she and her siblings hung out with. He asked if anyone they knew might have had some kind of grudge against her father. At this, Clara screwed up her face in what looked like deep concentration. Then she slowly listed off the names of some of her dad's closest friends, but said none of them had a grudge. And most of her friends had either never met her dad, or if they had, they really liked him. But then, Locke watched as Clara's expression changed. It looked like she had just remembered something else. And suddenly, she looked straight at Locke with a focus in her eyes that he hadn't seen until now. She said one of her friends had recently met her dad over Thanksgiving break, and ever since then, he'd been acting really strange and intense. She told Locke that his name was Kyle Hulbert. He was 18, and they had met at a Renaissance fair a few months earlier. They'd gotten along really well at first, but over the last several weeks, his whole demeanor had changed, although she didn't know why. He'd actually gotten busted on a concealed weapons charge for carrying daggers around a shopping mall, and after that, Clara said she had tried to avoid him. At the mention of daggers, Locke's eyes narrowed. This murder case involved an unusual blade as the murder weapon, and while daggers weren't long like the murder weapon, they were an unusual knife to carry, especially at the mall. Locke's disappointment over the teenagers and the tow truck disappeared as he underlined Kyle Hulbert and daggers in his pad. This was a good lead. He told Clara they were almost done, and soon she could go back with her sister and they could tell their brother together. But first, he needed to know the names of Kyle's closest friends. Clara nodded and started listing off names, which Locke wrote down as quickly as he could. But when Clara got to the last name, Locke's pencil froze on the page. Because Locke knew he had heard this name before. Just a few hours earlier, in fact, when he was standing in the tow truck company lobby. It was Michael Foale, the teenage driver of the stuck car. The next day, December 11th, Locke had Michael Foale picked up by police officers when he left his house with his girlfriend in the car. Officers took both of them to the station, put them in separate rooms, and told them to wait. Someone would be in to question them soon. Meanwhile, Locke executed a search warrant at Michael's house. Police seized a desktop computer, 2 black cloaks, multiple knives, a document about human sacrifice, and a sword with a blade more than 2 feet long with little flecks of blood still on the metal. That afternoon, when Locke walked into the interview room where Michael was waiting, he felt like he had a pretty good case. Now, he just needed Michael to talk. And pretty much the second he sat down, Locke got his wish. Michael Foale and his girlfriend agreed to tell Locke everything they knew. But their story was more bizarre and more horrific than Locke or anyone else had expected. In fact, it was so wild and so shocking that it would take several more weeks of investigation before Locke and the rest of the police were able to fully untangle the sequence of events that Michael Foale and his girlfriend used that day. But finally, on February 1st, 2 months after Robert Schwartz's death, the police arrested the mastermind behind the murder. And it was not who the police had expected it to be. Based on interviews, evidence, and transcripts from online and phone conversations, The following is what happened to Dr. Robert Schwartz on the night of Saturday, December 8th, 2001. At around 6:15 p.m., the killer sat in the back seat of a car driving down a muddy dead-end road in the woods in a rainstorm. The killer's friend, Michael Toll, was driving, and Michael's girlfriend was riding in the front passenger seat. Michael and his girlfriend were both talking because they were trying to find the big old farmhouse that was their destination, but the killer was not paying attention to them. Instead, the killer was completely focused on a different voice, a voice that no one else could hear. The voice was named Nicodemus, and Nicodemus was a god. In fact, Nicodemus was one of 6 gods that had lived inside the killer's head for as long as the killer could remember. And now, Nicodemus had a warning. "Don't go up there," Nicodemus shouted inside of the killer's head. Now, usually, the killer listened to Nicodemus. The killer knew the god was just trying to keep them safe. But tonight, the killer knew they could not back down from their plan. Innocent lives were at stake because the killer knew something that no one else did. And that was that Dr. Robert Schwartz was a monster. He lashed out with violence even though no one else could see it, and he poisoned lemons and pork with sulfuric acid. And recently, the killer was absolutely certain that Dr. Robert Schwartz had begun planning a murder of his own. The killer knew they had to strike first. So, from the backseat of the car, the killer answered Nicodemus, telling the god in a whisper, "I have to do this." The car came to a stop in the mud in front of Robert Schwartz's farmhouse, and the killer got out wearing a long black trench coat that hid a 27-inch long sword. The killer stalked through the rain up to Robert's front door and started knocking, hard. After a minute, the killer heard footsteps squeaking on old hardwood inside the house. Then, the door opened. The killer could smell the dinner that Robert was cooking in the kitchen. Robert stood in the doorway, looking down at the killer in confusion. "Yes?" he asked. The killer asked if Clara was home, and Robert said no. So the killer asked for Clara's phone number, and Robert invited the killer inside out of the rain while he wrote it down. This was when the killer decided to strike. As Robert stood with his back to the killer, writing out his daughter's phone number, the killer told him, "I know your plans." And as Robert turned in confusion, the killer pulled out the sword and began slashing. Robert tried to protect himself, grabbing for the blade and cutting his hand in the process, spilling blood all over the floor. But the killer was in an unstoppable frenzy. The killer yanked the sword away from Robert and then slashed his stomach. Somehow, Robert stayed standing as the killer swung the sword and sprayed blood across the kitchen. Some of the blood landed in the killer's mouth, and the metallic taste filled the killer with pleasure and adrenaline. The killer slashed Robert over and over until finally Robert fell, landing face down on the hardwood. Robert wasn't moving anymore, and Nicodemus was screaming at the killer to stop, but the killer couldn't stop. Some of Robert's blood had landed on the hot stove, where it was now sizzling, and the smell filled the air as the killer rammed the sword all the way through Robert's body over and over again, sinking the tip of the blade into the hardwood beneath Robert. By the time the killer finished, Robert's clothing was shredded and he had been stabbed more than 30 times. The killer stood over his victim for a minute and then calmly walked over to the stove to turn off the burner. And then before he left the house, as a final touch, the killer took the sword and carved an X into the back of Robert's neck. The killer did this because X was the signature of an assassin in the fantasy game that the killer loved. That fantasy game was called Underworld. Underworld had been created by the killer's best friend, and it was the killer's best friend who was the mastermind behind the murder of Robert Schwartz. In the game of Underworld, the mastermind went by the name High Priestess of Chaos, and the killer was Albert, and the mastermind's name was Clara Schwartz. It would turn out Robert Schwartz's daughter, Clara, had never come out of her depression after the death of her mother. Instead, she sunk deep into misery and also paranoia and became convinced that her father was trying to kill her. And when Clara met Kyle Hulbert at a Renaissance fair, she found a willing player in her dark fantasy world. Kyle was schizophrenic and bipolar, and he'd grown up in foster care. It was clear that Clara herself was the driving force behind the murder of her father. She was found guilty of first murder and conspiracy and sentenced to 48 years in prison. In a final twist, it was the DNA research that Dr. Robert Schwartz himself had spent his career on, which helped investigators to determine that the blood on the sword belonged to Robert. Late in the afternoon on Wednesday, February 20th, 1980, Catherine Foster sat on the cold metal bleachers beside her university's soccer fields. The men's team at the University of South Alabama was playing a practice game, and it was very easy for Catherine to pick out her favorite player. He was the very tall and handsome one with dark and curly hair. His name was Tom Jadon, and he'd been Catherine's boyfriend for years, ever since they went to high school together in the small city of Pascagoula, Mississippi. Catherine and Tom were young, both just 18-year-old freshmen, but they were committed to each other. When they were seniors in high school, Tom received a soccer scholarship to the University of South Alabama in Mobile, so Catherine enrolled in the same school just to be near him. Catherine had earned the second highest grades in her entire graduating class, and so she could have gone to college anywhere, but realistically, it did not feel like a sacrifice for her to follow Tom to this school. The University of South Alabama was well known for its physical therapy program, which was Catherine's specialty, and so having her boyfriend there just made college that much better. While Tom and his teammates played soccer, Catherine called out to two young women looking up at the bleachers from the grass below. One was tall and thin, this was Tish O'Sullivan, and the other was shorter and more athletic looking, and her name was Jamie Kellum. And these two were Catherine's best friends, and when they saw Catherine calling to them, they smiled and rushed up to her and sat down on either side of her. And for a moment, all three young women just sat there and watched Tom and the other players out on the soccer field, but then the coach blew the whistle and called all the players to the sidelines. And so suddenly there was not soccer to watch, and so the three friends stopped looking at the field and they just looked to each other and began chatting. Catherine had known Tish since they were in elementary school. They'd gone to the same Catholic church and the same high school in Pascagoula, but Catherine had not met Jamie until her first day of college. She and Tish had been standing in line for registration, and Jamie happened to be in front of them. They got to talking and realized Jamie was also from Pascagoula. She had just gone to a different high school, that's why they didn't know her. And so the three young women bonded over their shared background, and ever since that fateful meeting, they'd been inseparable. They all loved the energy of living in a big city for the first time, and lately, the women had been keeping an eye on a brand new mall that was under construction in downtown Mobile. Jamie leaned over and told her friends that she thought the mall was actually finally open now, and so they should go check it out the next day. Catherine and Tish loved the idea, and none of them had anything to do in the morning, so they could go shopping, have lunch, and still be back in time for afternoon classes. So they agreed to meet in the parking lot outside of Catherine's dorm building around 10 a.m. the next day. Just then, Catherine's boyfriend Tom came jogging over. He was sweaty and his curly hair was sticking to his forehead, but Catherine didn't care. She gave him a big kiss on the cheek and then took his hand. Then all four friends head to the city dining hall for dinner before settling in for another evening of studies. The following morning, Catherine woke up before her alarm and she immediately rolled out of bed and jumped in the shower. After that, she went to her closet and full outfit for the morning: blue jeans, brown walking shoes, and a light sweatshirt. Her chest against the morning chill. After a few minutes, when still Catherine had not come back outside again, Amy was so cold that she climbed inside of her car and turned it on, put on the heat, and turned on some music. And as she was sitting there waiting, it started to feel like Catherine was taking a really long time. Amy thought about maybe going inside to check on her, but she told herself, Catherine's fine, she'll be out in a second. But after three more songs played and still Catherine had not come back out again, Amy really started to get worried. But just then, she looked up and noticed Tish walking across the parking lot towards her. And so Jamie rolled down the window and actually yelled to Tish, like, hey, come over here. So Tish, sensing something was wrong, she ran over. And when the two women linked up, Jamie explained that Catherine had apparently lost her purse and gone back inside, but that was like 15 minutes ago and she still had not come back yet. Fish agreed that was weird, and it was not like Catherine to suddenly abandon her friends. And even if Catherine could not find her purse, and that was the reason it was taking so long, she would have come back by now to tell them that was what was going on so they wouldn't worry. Also, remember, these were the days before cell phones, so a phone call or text message was just not an option. Tish could only think of one explanation. Maybe Catherine had run into her boyfriend, Tom, and decided to go hang out with him instead. It was definitely strange that Catherine never returned to let Jamie know, but the girls knew Catherine was head over heels in love with her boyfriend, and so that did kind of seem like something that could happen. Jamie nodded at this idea and agreed that Catherine could have dumped them for her boyfriend. But Tish had a class with Catherine later that afternoon, and so they'd be able to figure out what happened then. So Tish and Jamie, after waiting for a few more minutes and still not seeing Catherine, they decided to just go ahead with their shopping trip without Catherine. Tish got into the car, and the two young women pulled out of the parking lot and headed for the new mall in downtown Mobile. This is she was. Second, Sergeant Williams. He submits. Still believes that Akron would show up soon. Sergeant Williams talked to Tom. Williams appreciated the information. Following day, Saturday. Tom again comes. So they have the security on. discovered some crucial information. Temple. Why showed no signs of assault. She was not killed until it leaked where she was killed. Back to the police station. Student at the University of South, where the body was found. The student said she'd woken up at 38 a.m. on Saturday and just could have been those talking sounds. At the time of death based on the autopsy. So the student might have killed Catherine. Williams ran out with police cruiser towards the university. When Catherine's closest friends. February 23rd. Wanted to know if Tish and Tom beat, but she did manage. Every night, she had been through. So Jamie and they had an alibi. They just said sleeping. And they there's no way to prove that. Cameras or other monitoring systems didn't go anywhere besides their dorm. Tish sounded like she was suspicious of Catherine's sleep. Speaking to the three friends, Sergeant Williams, they back to the police station. Sergeant Williams sat in his desk. Violent crimes on through each one, looking for anybody suspect. Documents. The documents caught his attention. Several months before Catherine's near the woods. Woman agreed and got the truck, but nothing. and it's all more detail that popped out who attacked the student employed at the university. To bring the maintenance. February 24th, from at the police station. The maintenance worker where he'd been at around 2:30 a.m. on February 23rd. Working an overnight shift in a part of the campus relatively far. Williams, this did not make it seem less suspicious. All it did is it showed this maintenance worker was fully awake and on campus. Williams called the maintenance the worker was under his supervision and he never disappeared. And though this maintenance worker did an ugly criminal, Williams just had no way to actually link him to murder, so he ended up telling the maintenance worker that he was free to go. The interview was not a total loss because the conversation got Williams thinking of a new possibility. Heard the medical examiner saying that Catherine didn't have any defense that would come from an assault. So he thought maybe she was where she was ultimately killed with a person who she trusted. In a position of authority. Interview room with COC at the University of South Carolina. Night around 2:30 a.m. They always spent their entire shifts. They worked overnight. Or the other. All Williams knew. They remember something happening that night. They heard two loud popping sounds. First, they thought maybe the noise was coming. Never confirmed that and didn't do anything. Well, they said it was possible those sounds could have been gunshots. So these guards clearly go. He did now have two more witnesses who might have heard the shots that killed Catherine. After the guards were gone, so far he had quizzed 6 potential suspects about their whereabouts at the time of staff, and all of them had alibi. Since for now he was sort of out of potential other suspects, he decided he would just turn his attention towards a new goal. He wanted to find the gun that killed Catherine because obviously that could lead him to. Sergeant Williams and the Mobile Police Department spent the next several days interviewing people and also scouring the campus for the gun. February 28th marked 1 week. Very little evidence to go. Sergeant Williams stood outside the university library, looking on as another officer stuck his arms into a small duck pond. Sergeant Williams almost wanted to laugh. It seemed so unlikely that a murderer would dump their murder weapon into such a tiny pond. Then this officer was reaching into the pond. He shouted and held his arm up in the air. Sergeant Williams silver handgun. Looked closely and he realized the gun was a caliber, just like the gun used to kill Catherine Foster. Williams's excitement soon turned to disappointment when they sent this for ballistics testing, and it did not match the gun. He swear one again. Investigators continued looking for leads, but as time went on, the tip dried up, able to make a big breakthrough. So the case went cold, and it stayed that way for the next 3 years. Still, this case haunted Sergeant Williams, who had a habit of cracking back open Catherine's case file at least once a week. So, on February 18th of 1980, an alibi for the night of the murder, or at least that's what Sergeant Williams thought. Sergeant Williams went through every inch of Michael's home, and in the attic above the garage, he found yet another chilling scene. Sitting up there in the dark was a big cage. It's actually big enough for an adult to stand up inside of and actually walk around inside. It's made out of chicken wire and had a lock on the outside, while on the inside there was a mattress and pillows. The picture of Catherine locked inside of this cage formed in Sergeant Williams's mind. Suddenly, everything made sense. Maybe Michael had kidnapped Catherine and held her in this cage inside of his house before ultimately taking her out to the woods and killing her. Sergeant Williams rushed back to the police station and immediately contacted the other security guard who'd been working the night of Catherine's death. This other guard swore up and down that he really had been helping her 3 years earlier. He was with Michael that entire night, and they had nothing to do with this. Sergeant Williams hung up the phone. It was possible that maybe Michael was not the killer, even though he had a creeping fixation on Catherine's murder. But did anyone explain that cage he had up in his attic? The sergeant contacted Michael's next of kin and asked about the dishonored chicken wire enclosure. Michael's family members said that the cage was actually where Michael opted to have his grandfather. The tendency to wander around the neighborhood. It was not meant to be cool. Grandfather safe. Just like that, Sergeant Williams's home lead started going cold. For years after this, Sergeant Williams kept reading Catherine's case file at least once a week, hoping for a lead that just never came. Eventually, Sergeant Williams left the police force, leaving behind the murder he was obsessed with solved. In 2002, so 22 years after Catherine's murder, another officer named Mike Morgan had taken over the now very cold Catherine murder case. Williams had been back in 1980, and he had close-cropped blonde hair, small blue eyes, and a long face. On December 4th of 2002, Officer Morgan got a surprising call at the Mobile police station. The man on the other end said he was a police officer in Pascagoula, Mississippi, which was Catherine Foster's hometown. He told Officer Morgan that a witness had come into the Pascagoula police station with information regarding Catherine's murder. Officer Morgan's heart started to race. By now, the unsolved murder was like an urban legend among college students and police officers in the area, a mystery that might never be solved. Morgan never imagined he'd actually get a break in this case. Officer Morgan told the officer in Pascagoula that he wanted to speak to this new witness in person. So he hung up the phone and rushed out the door to make the 40-minute drive to Mississippi. Less than an hour later, Officer Morgan was sitting in the Pascagoula police station with his heart still going a mile a minute. But the story that this witness ultimately told him was so incredible that Officer Morgan wasn't sure if he even believed it. It went against everything the Mobile Police Department thought they knew about Catherine's murder. Officer Morgan told this witness that he couldn't believe these wild claims unless he saw real proof. And this witness said Officer Morgan could see all the proof he could ever need if he just went to this one really specific address. So the officer got back in his police cruiser and he headed to that specific address. Morgan pulled up in front of a totally unassuming residential home. The owner was working in the yard, and they looked up when they heard a car pull up. Officer Morgan got out of the car, approached the owner, and explained why he was there. And so the homeowner then led the officer into the house and to a set of storage lockers. The owner unlocked one, pulled out the item that Morgan was asking for, and he handed it over. And the second Morgan looked down at this thing in his hands, he knew he had just solved Catherine Foster's 22-year-old murder. Based on the investigation that was done into this item, here is a reconstruction of what police believe really happened to Catherine Foster on the morning of February 21st, 1980. Catherine's killer felt very confident. They were sitting behind the wheel of their car, and when they saw Catherine walking outside of her dorm building, they jumped into action. They pulled up alongside her and began honking the horn and waving to her. Catherine looked over and her face lit up. She recognized the driver, and she was really excited to see them. Catherine ran over and hopped into the passenger seat. They chatted as they drove away from the university, but they didn't go very far. Catherine's killer rolled to a stop beside a wooded area just off campus and said they just remembered something. They said they needed a specific type of plant for a botany class they were taking. So they asked Catherine would they come into the forest with them and help them find it. And Catherine said, yeah, of course. And so the pair walked along the crunchy brown grass into the trees. And as they walked along, Catherine, who had her head down and was scanning the ground diligently for this plant, she began getting maybe a few steps ahead of her killer. And when this happened, and the killer realized Catherine was distracted, the killer stopped and just stood there staring at Catherine with rage burning inside of them. Then the killer quietly slipped off their backpack and then reached inside and began feeling around. And eventually they felt the .22 caliber pistol they had stolen from their grandmother, and they pulled it out, and without any hesitation, the killer raised that gun and aimed it right at the back of Catherine's head, and then they fired. But amazingly, Catherine did not fall down after getting shot in the head. Instead, she slowly turned around to look at her killer. Her eyes were wide with shock and confusion, and for a second, the two just stood there in silence, staring, until Catherine fell to the ground. But Catherine's killer could tell Catherine was not dead. She was still breathing. So they casually raised the gun again and fired a shot into her temple to make sure she was dead. Then the killer got out of the forest as fast as they could, and when they emerged from the trees, they tossed their grandmother's pistol into the nearest dumpster. Then they got back into their car, drove away from the crime scene, and went about their day like everything was perfectly normal. They didn't speak a word about what they had done for the next 22 years. But it would turn out trying to keep this horrible secret inside took a real toll on the killer. They began abusing drugs and alcohol, and eventually, in 2001, they joined an Alcoholics Anonymous group in Pascagoula in the hopes of getting sober. And as part of Alcoholics Anonymous, they began working through the famous 12-step program. Each step is designed to help people get to the root of their alcohol abuse and overcome it. And as part of step 8, Catherine's killer was instructed to make a list of everyone they had ever wronged. And Catherine's name was right at the top of that list. But the killer ran into a problem. Step 9 was about making amends to these people they had wronged. But Catherine was obviously dead, and so the killer didn't know how to apologize to someone who was not alive. So Catherine's killer confided in another member of their Alcoholics Anonymous group, explaining exactly what they'd done to Catherine Foster. And this other person said the best way to make amends would be to write Catherine an apology letter and read it over her grave. And that's exactly what the killer did. In late 2002, they stood in the cemetery where Catherine was buried in Pascagoula, Mississippi, holding a handwritten letter. They looked around to make sure they were alone, and then they read their apology out loud. The letter said, "Dear Catherine, after all these years, I have come to you. It is me, Jamie, the girl who took your life." It would turn out one of Catherine's two so-called best friends, Jamie Kellum, was actually her killer. The story about how Catherine had said she needed to go back into her dorm to get her purse and then she went missing, that was all a total lie told by Jamie to cover for herself. Officer Mike Morgan had figured this out through the witness who had come into the Pascagoula police station back in December of 2002. That witness was the Alcoholics Anonymous group member who Jamie had confided in, the one who suggested she write the apology letter. But after hearing about what Jamie had done, the witness just could not bear to keep the secret, and so they told Officer Morgan everything. And then they also told Officer Morgan the specific address of where this letter was currently located, because that was obviously the proof Officer Morgan needed. And this address led Officer Morgan to Jamie's stepfather's house, where apparently Jamie had hidden this letter inside of a locker. And so when Morgan asked the stepfather for the letter, Jamie's stepfather replied, quote, "You mean the letter?" So it sounded an awful lot like the stepfather knew what the note contained. And the letter didn't just contain Jamie's confession about killing Catherine, it also detailed her motive for killing Catherine. Although nobody knew it back in 1980, Jamie was absolutely obsessed with Catherine's boyfriend, Tom, the tall, handsome soccer player. Jamie and Tom had met long before either of them went to the University of South Alabama. They'd crossed paths at a tennis tournament during high school, and while Tom did not really remember Jamie, she forgot him. She kept tabs on him through the gossip in their small Mississippi hometown. In 1979, she found out Tom was in a serious long-term relationship with Catherine Foster, and that both of them were heading to the University of South Alabama for college. Jamie had received tennis scholarships to multiple schools in the southern United States, but she chose to go to the University of South Alabama, where she did not receive any scholarship money, for the sole purpose of secretly following Tom. And the day that Jamie met Catherine and Tish magically in the registration line and they all became best friends, that was not a coincidence. She intentionally inserted herself into that friend group to be closer to Tom. And then she began taking pictures of Tom and showing them to her family, claiming that he was actually her boyfriend. Ti comprerò tutto quello che vorrai, autunno, inverno, primavera, estate, chiama mai. È un attico a Dubai. Ma tanto no, il giorno in cui te la darò sarà quello in cui ti sposerò. Ma me la tolgo del GoPro. Quindi tu quelli no, quindi tu quelli no, li metto così no. Non mai mi distruggi no, quindi storia no, quindi tu quelli no. Ai coglioni tu, quindi tu quelli no. We don't talk anymore. We don't talk anymore. We don't talk anymore like we used to do. We don't laugh at we don't talk it.
I generally have this feeling that the Jehovah's Witness leadership could never really do something to shock me or blow my mind unless it was like something outrageously crazy, like enjoying pineapple or pizza, or thinking that creamy peanut butter is better than crunchy peanut butter. But aside from those massive sins, I really think, there's nothing they can really do that would shock me necessarily. And then I saw this. But if you can do it now, just imagine how it'll feel when the holy, we gotta talk about this. Quickly, before we get into this, I just want to provide a little bit of historic context as to why I find this so shocking. If you found it shocking, it's probably because you are imagining what your grandparents or what your parents would think of this broadcast. What would they think if they were just brought back to life and boom, look at what the Jehovah's Witness religion has become. Check it out right here. They would not believe you. They would say, no, that's you. You are an apostate. You're making this up. There is 0% chance that this could actually be Watchtower. So I just want to read a couple of quotes to you that honestly aren't from that long ago that talk about religions and their use of more contemporary music. So this is from a Awake article in 2007, and it was talking about what is happening to churches. And here on the very bottom paragraph, you can hear or read, in spite of the efforts of the clergy in popular politics, millions have turned from the Catholic faith to try other churches. Religions that hold services complete with hand clapping and fervent hymn singing or an atmosphere of a rock concert have grown and multiplied. very same article, they're talking about churches in North America. Some churches study business methods to learn how to better market their religious services. Congregations pay thousands of dollars to hire church consulting firms. It was a great investment, said one satisfied pastor, according to a report on such firms. Megachurches, with congregation members numbering into the thousands, do so well financially that they draw the attention of business publications, such as the Wall Street Journal and The Economist. These report that megachurches typically offer one-stop shopping for body and soul. Church complexes may include restaurants, cafes, beauty salons, saunas, and sports facilities. Attractions include theater, visiting celebrities, and contemporary music. And then I was trying to find a watchtower from 1993, but of course, jw.org likes to do this to me nowadays. But I found it anyway, and there is an article there talking about, do you respect your place of worship? And in that article, there was this paragraph. Christendom has manifested gross lack of respect in this area. Some religious organizations use their places of worship as a community centers for entertainment. They have live concerts of religious rock music, rooms for weightlifting, billiard tables, nurseries, and in-house cinemas. One church had a wrestling match as part of their program. That would hardly harmonize with the pattern set out by the apostles. So yes, Watchtower historically has looked very negatively upon other churches in Christendom, those false religious hooligans, as having this contemporary music. Now, church services, a very important part.
כן. לא, מזמן, כבר עד שהגעתם, נסענו כבר.
אז תבטל את הנסיעה לפחות, אחי, אתה סתם מחזיק אותי.
הבנתי, באיזה אפליקציה?
באפליקציה שלך, של יאנגו. תבטל את הנסיעה, את ההזמנה.
אוקיי, בסדר גמור. אוקיי. Jungkook. Jungkook. Nugget. فلوفون ولك.
You're right, man.
No, I don't think she fucking does drops or anything. That sucks.
Finally got my doctor giving me ADHD meds and shit, so that's all fucking good, but I need to get more. Because I'm fucking hanging right now.
Oh, yeah, you were telling me about that.
It takes me like 2-3 days to go to fucking sleep without fucking any vitamins, and it's fucking gay.
Oh, no. It's almost like the consequences of your own actions.
Fuck up, cunt.
Oh.
I like this girl.
Because I bumped into a fucking human trafficking ring that wanted to fuck babies or whatever.
מה נשמע? אמרת שיש מישהו שיוצא לידך, הוא יצא כבר? אז הוא בדרך אליי. אתה יכול בבקשה לשלוח לי הודעה את המספר טלפון שלו? טוב, אבל אתה אומר שהוא בדרך, אז אני כבר מתחיל ממש להתכונן לצאת. כן, בסדר, אבל אני אסע. לא, אני לא מלחיץ, אני גם לא רוצה פשוט שהוא יחכה לי, אז אני אשים נעליים בינתיים. בסדר, אבל בינתיים לשים נעליים או לא? לא הבנתי. אז בינתיים לא, אני לא מבין, לא להתכונן או להתכונן, אני לא מבין פשוט. אוקיי. בסדר גמור, אין בעיה, אבל אתה אומר שבן אדם יגיע היום. בסדר, הוא יצא ממודיעין לפה, הוא יצא ממודיעין לקריית אונו? טוב, בסדר גמור, יאללה ביי.
Are Jehovah's Witnesses a cult or part of Christianity? You see them at airports, in parks. A lot of times they'll come into your house and knock, well dressed and very polite, good people. And there's about 8,699,000 Jehovah's Witnesses around the world. They would offer about 5 million free home Bible courses. And they have about 117,000 congregations around the world. Now, we will answer whether Jehovah's Witnesses are a cult or they're part of Christianity in just a moment. But I want to just highlight a little bit of the background of where they started. Now, we have to go back to the Adventist background. There was a guy named William Miller. He was a farmer, a deputy sheriff, a justice of the peace, and the captain in the War of 1820. He announced in 1831 that the end of the world would come in 1843. According to Miller's estimations, about 50,000 to 100,000 people started to follow his teachings. But of course, it didn't happen. The world did not come to an end in 1843. But his associates revised the date to October 22nd, 1844. Still, the end of the world didn't come. What a disappointment. And the movement then split into various Adventist organizations, including what is known today as a Seventh-day Adventist. Now, you may say, what does this have to do with Jehovah's Witnesses? Well, one of the Adventist teachers was Charles Russell. He was born in 1852 and died in 1916.
In 1872, he founded the International Bible Students Association in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He denied the existence of hell. He denied the Trinity. He denied the divinity of Jesus. He taught that Jesus' presence had already returned to earth invisibly in 1874, that Jesus had become king in heaven in 1878, and that he would set up his visible millennial kingdom in 1914. Now, Russell set up the Watchtower Bible and the Tract Society of Pennsylvania in 1884 and made himself its president. He then moved the headquarters of his movement to Brooklyn, New York. Russell had expected to be raptured up to heaven with his followers in 1878, but it didn't happen. Russell then gave out a new teaching. Yes, he was wrong about the living saints going to heaven, but what really happened in 1878 was the date that the dead were taken to heaven. Pretty much, the dead got already raised and they are in heaven. After this, 1881 was proclaimed to be the year that the living souls would be taken to heaven. But of course, it did not happen. This is what's supposed to happen in 1914. The end of the preaching work, the end of all religion, the wholesome destruction of all government, the end of the Great Tribulation, the end of Armageddon, and Russell and his followers would be raised to heaven. Jesus' kingdom would be established as paradise on earth, and there would be a commencement of the earthly resurrection. Well, 1914 did not pan out. 1915 was claimed, but it didn't happen either on 1915. Then Russell began to deny that he ever really definitely asserted 1914 would be the year. Pretty much, a lot of these moving of the dates when Jesus' earthly presence would be established on this earth, and ends the story of this guy is that he passed away in 1916. And then 1917, Joseph Franklin Rutherford took over as a president of this Jehovah's Witness organization. And he actually changed the name of the movement to Jehovah's Witnesses. And Rutherford, he translated that 1914 date, but did not have better luck with predicting the end of the world. So as you see the foundational teaching that came from this guy who talked about the end of the world, and then some other guy picked that up and started setting dates and really bizarre doctrines that started to propagate, and of course all of his predictions were flat out wrong. Now, this is not just my opinion, but based on the teachings of the scripture, Jehovah's Witnesses are not evangelical Christians. They're not biblical Christians, followers of Jesus. And here are the reasons, and I'll give you 10 of them. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus was the first being that Jehovah created. Jehovah then created all things through Michael/Jesus. Jesus is not God, but he is a God. Christians don't believe in that. Christians believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is fully God and fully man. Therefore, on the basic fundamental issue of what Christians believe, Jehovah's Witnesses differ. Secondly, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus is not to be worshipped. They say, we do not worship Jesus as we do not believe that he is Almighty God. That's from their website. Christians, we worship Jesus. The Bible says that God has exalted Jesus' name above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. We see the disciples of Jesus worshiped Jesus after his resurrection. They even worshiped him during his time on earth, and they acknowledged him as Messiah. The third thing that Jehovah's Witnesses believe that we Christians do not is that they believe that Jesus was not resurrected with a physical body, but as a spirit being. And not only Jehovah's Witnesses, but other people claim to that there was no physical resurrection. And physical resurrection for Christians is a big deal, because we acknowledge that God created this physical world. He created our physical bodies, and sin has come into this world. Because of that, death came into this world. Because of that, we died. And Jesus came to restore everything through his death on the cross. He reconciles us to God, and Jesus becomes the first fruits of what is to come, meaning we will be raised from the dead as well, physically, not just spiritually. When Jesus rose from the dead, we see that he ate food with them. They were able to put their hands into his parts of his body where there was nails there before. And Jesus was physically present. Yes, his physical body was glorified body. He was able to move from one place to another. He could disappear and all of that, but it was still resurrected physical body. He was not just a spirit. And he will actually retain that human physical body for all eternity. He added on humanity. He became like us, yet without sin, fully God and fully man. And that is the fundamental belief that Christians that believe the Bible and the teachings about Jesus believe. The fourth thing is Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus' second coming has already occurred, that it took place invisibly in 1914. We don't see that proof of that in the Bible. We know that there are things that have to take place.
I'm not afraid. Damn, it's really bright out here. I guess I should have brought some sunglasses if I knew we were shooting a video outside. Now some of you out there might be up on your roof talking to yourself too. Join famous rappers, so no one cares. Now if you excuse me, I'm going downstairs. You can try and throw away my lyric sheets before I can read them. Ha! Too bad I gotta memorize, I don't even need them. Yeah, I still got homophobic lines, but you can't get upset cause that fag Elton John and I once did a duet. To my fans, I apologize for ruining your life. I'll get back to writing songs about murdering my wife. He spits his lines a perfect time without any rehearsal. Sometimes he rhymes about himself in the third person. His rapping is hilarious or completely serious, and if you make fun of him, then he will get freaking furious. Cause he can dish it out, but he just can't take it. Like a baker who hates cake, but always bakes it. Who's this dude looking at me? He looks just like me. He's clocking me, knocking me. I think he wants to bite me. Ow, I tried to hit the man, but he broke my hand and then he ran. Must have been a crazy fan. Oh damn, there he is again. I'm not afraid to throw a chair, to throw a chair. It was from IKEA. It was from IKEA. So I don't care. So I don't. I'm bumping into people on the street. I'm wearing shape-ups on my feet. I'm just like you. I've been there too. I'm rich and famous, so I take that You are playing against alliance.
פדופיל.
You do not ban Furion because you can counter it.
So we are in the draft. Game 3.
Once again, thank you for joining us. It is game 3 of Alliance vs. Liquid. It's pretty much all on the line here.
Alliance instantly picks Furion.
We got DF Profit first. He's applying the rat out. Good by Studio Range Drive. Thought he's have a double kill here.
He's just going to win.
It's an ultra. He's taking the melee back.
You have reached the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline.
If you are in emotional distress or
You lose against Alliance. You ban Furion next time you play against Alliance because you're not stupid.
Classic Alliance Dota. They will take it to Super Force Vegas and the King of the Rats. I seriously doubt you can defend against all that.
שקופים אבל נראים.
רק לפני יומיים וחצי צה"ל פילר את נסראללה ומועצת השורא כבר מצא לו מחליף, את בן דודו, שנראה כמו נסראללה רק מאתר תמו. באיראן מפתחים גרעין, אבל נראה שבלבנון מפתחים שיבוטים של בני אדם. הוא נראה כמו המינימי של חסן, כאילו פתחו את נסראללה ויצא ממנו נסראללה קטן יותר, ואחרי שיפתחו אותו יצא נסראללה עוד יותר קטן, ואז יצא נסראללה פיצי. זה כמו בבושקה של מחבלים, אבל זה בתכלס מה שאמרו ברחוב הערבי. תורידו לנו מנהיג אחד, יבוא אחד אחר אחריו. אין בעיה, אני בעד שנעבור לדור הבא, כי אני מקווה שמנהיגי ארגון טרור הם כמו אייפונים. מגיע אחד חדש, אבל הוא לא באמת מחדש כלום, ועוד מביאים אותו בלי אוזניות, מגן או ראש טעינה. רק אחרי ששדרגת, אתה מבין שזאת הייתה טעות, והקודם היה טוב יותר. תראו את הבחור, תראו את המבט על הפנים שלו. הוא נראה כמו מושון מחגיגה בסנוקר. הוא לא יודע למה, אבל יש לו הרגשה שהרבבו אותו. נראה לי שהוא באמת לא מבין למה הוא נכנס עכשיו. אחרי החיסול הממוקד, ישראלים בכל מקום יצאו לחגוג. שמתי לב שיש רק שני דברים שמוציאים ישראלים לחגוג ברחוב. חיסול של מחבל וזכייה באירוויזיון. זה שני דברים כל כך שונים אחד מהשני, אבל בשני המקרים מי שגרם לנו לאושר לרוב לובש סמלה. יש גם ישראלים שלא יצאו לחגוג כי הם אומרים שכתוב בתורה בנפול אויבך אל תשמח, אבל זה לא מדויק למקרה הזה, כי בנפול אויבך מדבר על האויב הפרטי שלך. נניח השכן שלך מלמעלה עושה מועבטים עד הבוקר וזורק לך סיגריות, שקיות קמגרה וקונדומים משומשים למרפסת כבר שנים, ואתה אומר לו, רמי, אתה יכול בבקשה להתחשב קצת? והוא עונה לך, בן ש... ביום אחד באופן מפתיע הוא עושה תאונה קטלנית עם הטימקס על 120 קמ"ש במחלף רמלות. אז אומרים, אל תהיה מאושר כשאתה חוזר הביתה ורואה בלופי של הבניין את המודעת אבל עם השם שלו. תלך, תנחם, תאכל בורקס פטריות, תעשה כבוד אחרון למת. ויש משפט שאומר, באבוד רשעים רינה, שזאת שמחה ציבורית ושצריך לחגוג כשמישהו זבלה נעלם מהעולם, וזה אף רצוי לאכול אפי איפו או קרפ נוטלה אחרי שפירקו גבר עם חצאית ל-400 חתיכות עם 83 טון חומר נפץ חודר. זה ההבדל. אבל אני גם שמח שהשכן שלי רמי מת בתאונת דרכים. בסדר? ככה אני. מה שכן נמצא לי יכול לחסל את נסראללה בתוך הבונקר שלו, זה אומר שאפשר להגיע לכל אחד. ויש כמה שבאמת צריכים להיזהר כדי שלא ייכנסו לרשימה השחורה של ישראל. למשל, שליחים של וולט שעושים משלוח עם אוטו. חבר'ה תבינו, משלוחים עושים עם דו גלגלי. לעמוד בפקק עם הפיצה שלי? זה אני יכול גם לבד. 2. נבחרת ישראל בכדורגל. מה יהיה? נגמר הקרדיט שאתם משלנו ואין לכם עורלה. ראו, הוזהרתם. 3. אסי עזר. סתם ככה אני רוצה, אין סיבה מיוחדת. 4. השמש. תיזהרי לך. חם אחו שרמוטה לאחרונה, תירגעי ומהר. איקאה, תתפקסו על עצמכם. הרעיון היה לקנות ולהרכיב לבד עם קצת חלקים. וואלה, קניתי שידה לפני חצי שנה, יש שם 40 סוגי ברגים, מפתח שוודי, מסור, את בוב הבנאי שייתן לי יד, וספר הוראות בעובי של מלחמה ושלום. מה? ואחרון חביב, טים קוק, מנכ"ל אפל. שומע אחי? אייפון 16? זאת עבודה בעיניים. חסר לך שהאייפון 17 לא יוצא עם מינימום לחצן טלפורט שמשגר אותך לאן שאתה רוצה, מכונת אספרסו ומגייץ. בונה, אייפון חדש יצא, 16. אנשים
לא היה להם טלפון. עם כוסות אשל באיכות, כאילו הם חיו בהגנה. יש לי חבר, דנינו, היה לו אייפון 15 פרו מקס, קנה ב-16. בא לישיבה מתרגש צועק, שדרגתי ל-16. חבל שלא שדרגת למוח. הבן אדם גדל מת חי פלוס. אין לו שקל, אבל מוציא 7,000 שקל על טלפון חדש, למרות שהקודם שלו עובד מעולה. ומה הסיבה?
זה יעזור לי עם הבחורות, אני יוצא לדייט, היא רואה אייפון חדש על השולחן, היא חושבת שיש לי ארגזים. איך היא תחשוב שיש לך ארגזים, דנינו? אתה לוקח אותם לדייט בפלאפל בריבוע בסניף של תחנת דלק ילו בצומת מסובים. אתה מציע להם לחלוק איתך פיתה. הן רואות שאתה מגיע לשם על קורקינט של ווינד. איך הן יחשבו שיש לך ארגזים? אייפון לא יגרום לך להיראות עשיר. חצי מהמדינה במצב כלכלי כזה רע שהם צריכים להסתובב עדיין עם הנוקיה 3100 צביקה פיק. בטח לא לשפוך ארגז של כסף בשביל מצלמה קצת יותר טובה. הסיבה היחידה לקנות את האייפון החדש הזה זה אם יש לך טלפון גמור מת שהסוללה מתחממת לכם ביד כשאתם צופים בפורנו. הסיבה היחידה. גם מצחיקות אותי הבחורות האלה שהולכות לקנות את האייפון 16 הזה כי יש לו מצלמה טובה יותר. למה את צריכה מצלמה טובה יותר? גם ככה את אוכלת סרטים על איך שאת נראית ניצן. יש לו 48 מגה פיקסל. 48 מגה פיקסל זה 48 מגה סיבות בשבילך לעוד 48 הזרקות של חומצה אלרונית בפנים. בשביל מה את צריכה את זה? זאת תוצאה על הפלאפון ואז עוד הוצאה אצל הדוקטור. אבל יש לו וידאו ב-4K. זה לא דבר חדש, היא טכנופובית. ככל שרואים יותר טוב במצלמה רואים כל קמת, כל קטן, ואת יותר מתבאסת על איך שאת נראית. כל הסטורים והתמונות היום זה עם פילטר. נשים אהבו את עצמם יותר בתקופה שהייתה מצלמה עם רזולוציה 480. כולם היו נראים מפוקסלים כמו דמויות ממיינקראפט. היה חרא של טכנולוגיה, אבל היינו אנשים שמחים. תקשיבו לי טוב, התפתחות הטכנולוגיה זה השטן. אסף ריגוש הלך. ישבתי השבוע לראות סדרה שנקראת מפלצות, הסיפור של ליל ואריק מנהל. יצר את ג'פרי דאמר, יצר גם את זה. כמה זה דפוק שרציתי לראות שני בחורים שרצחו את ההורים שלהם עם פאקינג שטגן לראש, רק כי הבמאי הוא אותו הבמאי של סדרה אחרת על בחור גיי ווירדו שהרג חתך לחתיכות ומוסס את הסטוצים שלו עם חומצה לתוך חבית כחולה בחדר השינה שלו. מה נהיה ממני? לאן הגעתי? פעם הייתי נהנה מג'פרי אחר, The Dude, ביג לובובסקי, סרט הזיה בקטע טוב, לא סטיות מיניות, לא כלום. זה סרט שמדבר על אדם סטלן עצלן ששותה קוקטייל רוסי לבן ומשחק באולינג. לילה אחד שני גברים פורצים לו הביתה ופשוט משתינים לו על השטיח המעפן שהוא אוהב שיש לו בדירה, רק כי הם מתבלבלים בינו לבין מיליונר אחר עם אותו השם שהבת זוג שלו, שחקנית פורנו בשם בני, חייבת כסף למפיק סרטי פורנו. כן! אתה יושב וצופה בסרט הזה והזמן פשוט לא זז. בקטע טוב, העלילה בסרט הזה היא כמו שחטה מאינדיקה איכותית. מצד אחד, תובנות לחיים וצחוקים ורגיעה, ומצד שני גם שומרת עליך ערני עם טיפ על האקשן. סרט עמוק שמתחפש למשהו פשוט. וכמה לא פשוט להיות פשוט היום, אה? אז חיפשתי בנטפליקס את ביג לובובסקי, ותנחשו מה נטפליקס אמר לי? אוי, לא! הסרט הזה לא זמין במדינה שלך, סורי! לכם נטפליקס, לא תעצרו אותי, יש לי VPN של סייבר גוסט. עכשיו אני יודע מה אתם חושבים. הנה התחלנו, ג'וני? זה הזמן שאתה הולך לעשות לנו פרסומת ל-VPN של סייבר גוסט, עכשיו תגיד לנו בטח שיש מלא סרטים וסדרות בנטפליקס ובאמזון שלא מציגים לישראל, אבל אם ניכנס דרך ה-VPN שלהם, נוכל לראות כל תוכן שקיים שם. הבנו! ולא מספיק זה, גם תגיד לנו משהו על זה שעם סייבר גוסט תקבלו אנונימיות מוחלטת באינטרנט ותחבר את זה לאיזו בדיחה על נסראללה שאם הוא היה משתמש בזה אולי לא היו יודעים שהוא נמצא בבונקר, ספורי אחי יקר, או שאולי תמליץ למחליף של נסראללה שלא כדאי לו להיכנס לתפקיד חדש ושיזמין חופשה ארוכה מחוץ ללבנון ומהר. כבר עושה את זה, אז שישתמש ב-VPN של סייברגוסט כדי למצוא דילים זולים יותר ומשתלמים יותר על טיסות ומלונות. או שתגיד משהו על קניות באונליין, או שיש 100 מדינות לבחירה אז נוכל להשוות מחירים לבד, או שלסייברגוסט יש מעל 38 מיליון יוזרים והוא מומלץ על ידי אתרי הטכנולוגיה הגדולים בעולם, ומנוי אחד עובד עם 7 מכשירים במקביל, ושאם אנחנו נלחץ על הלינק בתיאור למטה נקבל מחיר טיל חודר בטון $2 שזה 8 שקלים בחודש פלוס 45 ימים לבחון את המוצר? זה מה שאתה הולך להגיד לנו? תכלס לא התכוונתי להגיד את זה, אבל וואלה רעיון טוב. יש לכם ראש חריף אתם, אה? קטע חדש באמריקה! סטודנטים אמריקאים פרו-פלסטינים התחילו להתאסלם בכמויות. מסתבר שלהתאסלם הפך לטרנד. הגאונים שעד לפני שנה שמו גלידה על הרול-אפ שמים היום כפיה וחיג'אב על הראש. מסתבר שהמרת דת הפכה להיות קטע מרדני כזה. פעם להיות צעיר מרדן היה לעשות קעקוע ולשרוף ירוק. ב-2024 להיות מרדן זה להתכופף על שטיחון ולקבל על עצמך את חוקי השריעה. איפה הפמיניסטיות עם השיער הכחול והפלומה בשכי שהסבירו לסטודנטיות האמריקאיות שאישה שמתאסלמת זה בערך כמו אפרו-אמריקאי שמצטרף ל-KKK? מה השלב הבא? גייז עם כפיה? אנחנו כבר שם. לא יודע, אולי המרדף אחרי אידיאל היופי כבר התיש את האמריקאיות סופית שהן מחליטות ללכת על צעד כזה ולהגיד ביי ביי לביקיני מלולו למון ושלום לבולקה. עם הדבר הזה על הפנים אין צורך לעשות שפם, גבות, בוטוקס, חומצה אלרונית או ניתוח אף. כן, קצת קשה לנשום ככה, אבל עדיף בק על הפנים עבור בעלך מאשר בטן לפנים מבעלך. הכל יחסי. האסלאם זה לא פיקטי. מרגיש לי שמישהו צריך לספר לסטודנטים האלה כמה דברים שהולכים להשתנות להם. למשל, אין יותר ספרינג ברייק במיאמי. תארזו מזוודה, היעד החדש שלכם הוא ערב הסעודית. עולים לרגל למכה, למסגד אל-חרם. אין יותר בייקון בארוחת הבוקר. חנזיר זה אסור מעכשיו. אבל יש תחליף. ליד האומלט אפשר להגיש לכם קבב כבש. לא תרגישו בהבדל. חוץ מזה שיהיה לכם גרפסים של בור ביוף פתוח לאורך היום, ולא מסטיקים לא יעזרו לכם. כמובן שהם עושים את זה כי זה טרנדי עכשיו בקרב הסטודנטים שמפגינים נגד ישראל. מעניין אם גם כולם היו קופצים מהגג, הם גם היו קופצים. אני מקווה שכן, פחות אנטישמים. יאללה, שיהיה בהצלחה כמו שאומרים. ומהאוניברסיטאות בחול, לאוניברסיטאות, זה קשה להגיד את זה, ומאוניברסיטאות אנטישמיות בחול לאוניברסיטאות אנטישמיות בארץ. איך אנחנו אוהבים להעתיק את מה שקורה בחול, אה? חולים על טרנדים. מה-7/10 יש יותר ויותר מקרים של מרצים שתומכים בטרור ומסיתים לטרור בתוך המוסדות האקדמיים בארץ. כמו למשל פרופסור נדירה של האו"ם, מרצה באוניברסיטה העברית שאמרה שישראל משקרת לעולם לגבי ומסיתים לטרור בתוך המוסדות האקדמיים בארץ. כמו למשל פרופסור נדירה של האו"ם, מרצה באוניברסיטה העברית שאמרה שישראל משקרת לעולם לגבי מה שקרה פה לתינוקות ונשים ב7/10 ושזה הזמן לבטל את הציונות. או מרצה באוניברסיטת תל אביב, ענת מטר, שאמרה למחבל ווליד דקה שהוא אהוב ומקור להשראה. מעניין אם היא עשתה לו ביקור אסירים בכלא. תחשבו שמה-7/10 גויסו פלוס מינוס 70,000 סטודנטים למילואים. יש סטודנטים שנרצחו ויש סטודנטים שנחטפו. אז אפשר לצפות מהאוניברסיטאות בישראל מינימום לפטר את אותם המרצים על אמירות כאלה, ושסטודנט לא יחזור מהמילואים בעזה לכיתה שהמרצה בה היה רוצה שהוא ימות כי הוא חייל בצבא הכיבוש. אנחנו מתפלאים על מה שקורה בחול. אם זה מה שקורה אצלנו בבית, אז התאחדות הסטודנטים הארצית הגישה הצעת חוק כזאת. מרצה איש הוראה או חוקר שיתבטא או יפעל באופנים הבאים: שלילת קיומה של מדינת ישראל כמדינה יהודית ודמוקרטית, הסתה לטרור, תמיכה במאבק מזוין או במעשה טרור נגד מדינת ישראל, יפוטר לאלתר ולא יהיה זכאי לפיצויי פיטורים. ומה יקרה אם לא? המועצה להשכלה גבוהה תפחית מתקציבי המוסד האקדמי אשר יפר את הוראת סעיף זה. לפחות מישהו במדינה הזאת עובד. אבל ההיגיון מת במדינת ישראל, ובמקום לקבל בתמיכה את החוק הזה ולפטר כאלה שרוצים לבטל את הציונות, או מכחישים את מה שקרה בשביעי לעשירי, או מרטיבים על מחבלים, באוניברסיטאות בארץ מגדירים את זה כחופש הביטוי. אפילו באירופה כבר הבינו שמשהו מסריח ועשו פעולות למניעת האנטישמיות. צרפת אסרה על הפגנות אנטי-ישראליות. מה שכן מתקיים כרגע, מתקיים באופן לא חוקי. פלוס בוצעו 446 מעצרים על רקע אנטישמי נכון לעכשיו. בגרמניה הוציאו מחוץ לחוק את הקריאה From the river to the sea. עצרו מפגינים בגלל שלטים והתבטאויות לא חוקיות, והוציאו מחוץ לחוק כל הבעת תמיכה בחמאס. פלוס מתכננים שם שינוי חוק שימנע לתת אזרחות למהגרים ומבקשי מקלט שהורשעו בעבירות אנטישמיות, וחיוב המתאזרחים להכיר בזכות הקיום של ישראל והפיכת הכחשה זו לעבירה פלילית. בגרמניה בריטניה אסרה תמיכה בחמאס לפי חוק והעמידה לדין שתי נשים שתועדו עם תצלומים של מחבלי חמאס. כל זה קורה באירופה. ובארץ חופש הביטוי. תנו למרצים לומר מה שהם חושבים, כי זה חופש אקדמי. זה פשוט מטומטם. כאילו במדינת היהודים מותר לעשות ליהודים מה שרוצים. אם תגיד משהו על הקהילה הגאה אתה הומופוב, אם תגיד משהו על אנשים מלאים אתה שמנופוב.
Welcome to Amazon. Please note that this call can be recorded for